Hi, I'm Janet Prey with Islander Sewing Systems, and this is episode 2 of the Knit Fit series, where we are teaching how to make a sloper. If you haven't seen episode 1, it's really important, so go back and make sure you review that before you get started. The pattern we are using is pattern 1207, the Knit Sloper Block. Remember, we are only using the front and back pattern pieces. You do not need the sleeve yet, so please don't cut the sleeve out. All right, now let's talk about how we're going to fit these. Normally, you want to fit your knits on the body, but I want to show some examples. Sometimes we try to fit on a dress form because we're trying to fit ourselves, and we can't see the back and we can't see the side as well. So we try to do it on a dress form. Well, this is a standard dress form size 6. And they're pretty much all built the same with the same proportions from shoulder to bust point to waist, and waist to hip. But if you've taken your own measurements or tried to do any fitting, you know that almost no one matches those measurements. So then you could pad the dress form to try to duplicate your shape. And in some cases that can be somewhat successful. Biggest problem is you can't take away from the dress form. So the standard dress form, if a person had a very strong curve to their back or a hollow back, or you couldn't take that out. So you would be stuck with kind of fitting. The better way to fit would be to fit right directly on the body. In this example, this is Brenda, who works here at Islander Sewing Systems, and we did a test of the Ditto Form. The Ditto Form is a dress form company that comes out to you or to a specific location, and they do a scan of your body. And as you can see, as I rotate this, they really get the muscle structure, they get everything so that you can fit yourself. Because now Brenda could just spin this around and she knows exactly how this is going to hang on her back, as opposed to trying to look in a mirror or using 2 or 3 mirrors, and you just get frustrated trying to fit yourself. So this dress form is what I'm going to use because I know it's identical. And I know for sure it's identical because I did some tests on it on Brenda's body. However, if you don't have an identical dress form, you could contact Ditto Form. They're dittoform.com, I believe. Or you could have a buddy help you fit right on your body. That's really the only way you're going to get a true fit. Okay, so now that you've got your knit front and backs cut out and prepared, we're about ready to get started. You should have a front and your back cut out. In this example, I've cut the back and the front out of different color just to make it easier to see on camera. You don't have to do that. But what you need to have is the seam allowance marked. And I prefer using a Sharpie. We're never going to wear this garment, and a Sharpie is going to make everything so obvious that it helps us understand where that neckline is going to hit when it's sewn. So we're marking the stitching line. And it's a 5/8 in this pattern on the arm side, and it's 3/8 on the neckline. And you should have basted up your shoulder seams 5/8 with, well, let's see, wrong sides together. Wrong sides together. This is hard to remember because we're so used to sewing for years and years, and everything goes right side together. I can't tell you how many people will go over to the sewing machine, myself included, and say, okay, wrong sides together, and still sew it right side. So try to avoid that hiccup. So we're going to have these seams on the outside. Now, this, the one critical thing is Do not make any pattern alterations. You might say, oh, but I always do a full bust, or I always do, I don't know, a different type of an adjustment. Don't do them, because those might just throw your whole pattern out of balance. And the reason we're using this specific pattern to make our sloper is because we know it's in balance. We know that it is an excellent, excellent pattern. A lot of patterns in today's market are not. So we want to start out with that excellent pattern so that we keep everything straight and on grain. And once we have it fitted to our body, then we will end up with a pattern that we can use to justify any other patterns that might be slightly out of line or obviously would never fit us the way that they are drafted. For example, in this one you can see clearly that one shoulder is much higher than the other. Now in this example, it's very obvious, but if you were to be standing here talking to Brenda, you would never see this. Many of us have these asymmetrical issues. Then we always wonder why when I put my shirt on, I try one on in the department store, and the neckline is always just a little bit off to one side. Because you're not symmetrical, but the shirt is. But when you make clothes, you can make them symmetrical to your body as opposed to the standard measurements. So, straight a grain down the front is going to help us see if this thing is shifting to right or left. And same thing in the back. And you can see it's not straight, obviously. It's not going to be straight until we make some of these corrections. So we're going to start always with the shoulder seams. And the key thing to remember here, two things. One is we're going to undo this seam and we're going to be pinning this in place. We are not sewing, we are only pinning. And we have to clearly remember, and this is another thing that's very hard for us to always remember, is that when we are pinning these seam allowances, when we sew a pattern, are supposed to be right flush together. But when we're making a sloper or we're fitting a garment, that's not a rule anymore. As a matter of fact, it's not likely to be like that. So remember that we are not necessarily going to keep these edges even. When we finish our pattern, yes, they will be. Not to worry about that, but at the moment, they're not. So I'm going to take these out. I'm going to take out this shoulder seam. And you're going to find on most dress forms a straight line that goes right down the top of the shoulder. On a person, if you're fitting a person, you'll have to use a critical eye to make sure that that is running straight across there. Because if the shoulder seam is pitching front or back, the whole garment's not going to hang right. And this one is definitely pitching to the back. This seam is at an angle. And we want to get it straightened out, and we want to make sure everything fits at the same time. So I like having a few pins right here in my dress form. And then I'm going to pop this seam out. And again, we basted it on the sewing machine at about a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Well, at a 5/8 inch seam allowance, excuse me. All right, so what we want to do now is take a critical eye and take a look at how this is fitting, and we want to pin it on that straight centered top of the shoulder. So to do that, we've got to, in this instance, we're going to have more seam allowance in the front and less in the back. Much less. But that will all get corrected when we make our pattern. All right. I'm afraid maybe, is this easy enough to see? That's my only concern here. Can you see what I'm doing? All right, we want to always make sure this is staying straight. And I'm staying right on that line. Keep everything's smooth. And then I'll show you what I've done here. Pin. All right, let me see. Okay, now I want you to see this is on the straight now, but now look at the back. Do you see? We have had to take away from or use more of the fabric from the back in order to get it to be right straight on the top and centered. Now that one's pretty even. All of them aren't going to be even. You can't just say, oh, okay, then I'll just make this 3/8 and this 5/8. You can't do that because sometimes they will be very uneven. They might be different from one end of the seam to the next. So just follow the body. Don't follow any other ideas. Just the body, okay? So that's what our shoulder looks like on that side. It's starting to hang straighter in the back now. So let's go to the other side. And as you can see, we're going to have an entirely different issue over here. Okay, now we've pinned the right shoulder. And this is one, what I was just talking about, how they won't come out even. Look at the difference in this one. You can see that we use the full amount of the front seam allowance right up at the neck, but by the time we get down here, it's going at a very big slant on both the front and the back, but in opposite ways. But it lays right straight on the shoulder. That's the goal. So once you've done that, either on the dress form or the body, and again, on a dress form that isn't sculpted to your body, that straight isn't going to necessarily be your straight. So that's where it gets very difficult. In this example, Brenda could never fit herself on a standard dress form. Some of us can, but most of us, there's always going to be that little issue or two that isn't going to work. All right, so now our next step is to do the side seams. Now, again, always paying attention here, and as you can see, we've got a whole lot more fabric on this side, and that's because the shoulder is pitched up. So we've got to make sure we're paying attention to that as we pin our side seams. So you might be, again, inclined to just, I'll just pin this in like this, and that'll look nice. But the problem is you're pinning equally front and back, and you very seldom will you ever be doing that when you're doing an actual true fitting. So we're going to just take the basting out, and the goal is, again, with a balanced pattern, it started out, it should go straight down the body if the body matches the pattern. So what we want to do is make the pattern match the body so that we have that in all of our future projects. So we want to maintain the ease that's supposed to be in there, at the same time making sure that we're getting a good fit. So I'm going to pin that, and I'll be right back with you. All right, I've gone ahead and pinned the side seams, and I had a little difficulty because I want to make sure this stayed straight. So I finally ended up pinning it right to the center front line on the dress form so that I could see that I wasn't getting too much on one side or the other. And I did the same thing here. Because of her shoulder slope being different, it's obviously going to hang crooked unless we make these adjustments. Now, here's a very interesting thing that happened here, and that is once I got these side seams, I noticed I've got this now, which means I've got to what's called smooth this up into the shoulder, this wrinkle here. So we'll just And this is why we're not sewing anything, because we may have to repin a few things. Because once you fix one area, it might show you that you need to make some changes in another area. So I'm going to bring that up here. And it may take a little finessing to get it just right. I need to get a little more up out of there. And of course I want to make sure I'm not reshaping the back in a bad way, so always keep an eye on that. But I think that's really coming along. And one of the reasons that we have these marked is, well, one, we can see how deep of a neckline we want. And of course, if this is on a body, you can actually physically see. On a dress form, oftentimes once you get used to using your dress form, you might have a mark on there. This is the lowest I want my neckline to go, or something like that. So, but as you can see, this line for the seam of the sleeve comes in much further here than it does here. So her shoulder is going to be kind of exposed here. So we'll have to bring this shoulder seam out a little bit in order to make it balance. So we'll cover that when we go to make the pattern. All right, so once you have this balance, so you want to make sure that you've got everything straight, everything looking, and still enough ease, enough wearing ease that you're going to be comfortable. Better to leave more ease than less, because you can always go back in and do a fine tuning, especially if the first one you make, you just baste the side seams together to double check. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, but you'll get there. Okay, so then the next thing to do here is to mark the seam line. Now, once we know we've got it and it's hanging right and we like the way it's looking, we're going to pin, we're going to mark along the pinned stitch line, because this is now our new stitching line. So what we want to do is mark right along that pin. If you can, right along the pin, but you got to do both sides because it's going to be in a different place, right, on the front than it is the back. And we're going to transfer these lines onto our sloper pattern. And you're going to do that front and back on all four. So the shoulder seams and the side seams. Mark those pin lines. All right, now I want to show you just a little troubleshooting for people who have rounded backs. Now, as I promised, I want to show you how to, what to do if you have an area where you don't have enough fabric. For example, a rounded back. You're going to need more fabric to go up over the rounded part of the back. So what you can do is actually add a piece of fabric to the top of the back and then pin that in place. And you can actually redraw that. If you don't like the way the neckline's coming, you can redraw the stitching line for your neckline, and that would be a good time to do that. But you can see I've just added a little bit of fabric to cover up, because a lot of us that have a rounded back like myself don't like the necklines to be so low in the back, and because of the rounded back they're even lower. So getting that up there is far more comfortable and more pleasing for those of us who have that issue. So I put a horizontal line down here just to make sure that I am keeping everything in balance. And that's all you need to do. And we'll show you how to add that to your pattern. So just mark your stitching line as you did before. And that's all you need to do until the next episode of the Knit Fit series here at Islander Sewing Systems. I'll see you then.